The shattered vase. The words did not come as a shout, but as a quiet, cold statement, placed on the marble kitchen island between them like a dead thing. I want to divorce Eleanor. Eleanor Vance set down the ceramic bowl she was drying, the cloth moving in slow, deliberate circles even as the world tilted on its axis. She did not look at him immediately, instead focusing on the play of evening light through the window over the sink, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Their kitchen was a showpiece, all gleaming surfaces and professional-grade appliances, a testament to Julian Croft's success. It had never really felt like hers. "It's Chloe, I assume?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. The question was a formality. She had seen the signs woven into the fabric of their recent life, the new cologne, the texts that made him smile in a way she hadn't seen in years, the business trips that always seemed to coincide with his publicist's schedule. Julian shifted his weight, his handsome face a mask of pained resolve. At 43, he was at the height of his appeal, his dark hair silvering just enough to suggest wisdom, his frame still trim from hours in kitchen expediting rather than cooking. It wasn't planned. It just happened. She understands the pressures I'm under, the brand I'm building. She's part of that world, and I'm not. Eleanor finally turned to look at him, her gaze direct. "I wasn't part of that world when you were a line cook with burned fingers and dreams bigger than our bank account? When I waited tables until my feet ached to pay the rent on that apartment that smelled permanently of fried onions." She didn't mention the miscarriages, the silent grief they'd weathered in that small space. That felt too sacred, too brutal to wield as a weapon. "That was different," he said, a familiar dismissiveness in his tone that had always made her feel small. "We were different people then. I need someone who can stand beside me in the world I've built, not someone who wants to hide from it." His eyes scanned their pristine, sterile kitchen, a place where meals were often photographed for social media rather than truly enjoyed. Eleanor's heart, which had been beating a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs, suddenly stilled. The pain was there, a vast, cold ocean of it, but something else surfaced through it, a crystalline clarity. She had been good enough for the struggle, but not for the success. She had chosen a quiet life, nurturing their son and her own small, shelved dreams, and he had mistaken that contentment for a lack of ambition. "Chloe is 30, Eleanor stated quietly. "I am 41. "This isn't about age," Julian insisted, though the flush on his neck betrayed him. "Leo will be home from art class soon," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a new strength. She walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured garden, another feature of the Julian Croft brand. "I think you should be the one to tell him why his father is dismantling his family." Julian's confident facade finally cracked. "I thought we could tell him together, present a united front, make it easier for him." "Nothing about this is easy, Julian." She turned to face him, her posture straight, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. "And I will not pretend that it is for the sake of appearances. That is your specialty, not mine." As she stood there, the man she had loved for 17 years already feeling like a stranger, she made a silent promise to herself. This would not be her end. It would be her beginning. And one day, Julian Croft would look at what he had discarded and see not the quiet woman he left behind, but the foundation he had foolishly abandoned. The door clicked open down the hall, and the sound of their son's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. Eleanor drew a deep breath, ready to catch the first piece of their shattered world. The new apartment smelled of lemony polish and the faint, hopeful scent of fresh paint. It was small, the living room and kitchen bleeding into one another, a world away from the sprawling, echoey house Leo had called home. Eleanor watched her son carefully arrange his sketchbooks on a shelf he'd just assembled, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 12, he possessed his father's dark, intense eyes, but they held a depth of sensitivity Julian had never cultivated. "It doesn't feel like home," Leo said quietly, not looking up from his task. His voice didn't waver with tears, but with a solemn acceptance that broke Eleanor's heart more than any outburst could have. "Not yet," she agreed, coming to stand beside him. She ran a hand over his hair, a gesture he still allowed for now. "But it will. Homes aren't found, Leo. They're built. We'll build ours. The divorce had been swift, a transaction efficiently managed by lawyers. Julian's guilt had been quantified into a generous settlement, a number on a page that was meant to absolve him. Eleanor had taken enough to ensure stability, to pay for this apartment near Leo's school, and to keep a small, stubborn ember of possibility alive. She had refused alimony. This new life would not be funded by the man who had walked away from it. One afternoon, while Leo was at his father's for the weekend, a stilted, awkward affair filled with expensive toys and Chloe's overly bright chatter, Eleanor found herself walking through the older part of the city. The air here was different, smelling of old brick, coffee grounds, and possibility. That's when she saw it, a narrow, neglected storefront tucked between a bookshop and a florist. The windows were grimy, but the "For Lease" sign in the door was new. Peering through the glass, Eleanor's breath caught, past the dust and shadows. She could see the beautiful original tilework on the floor, the high ceilings, and the generous front window that flooded the space with soft, northern light. It was a forgotten jewel. The realtor, a weary-looking woman named Diane, met her the next day with a jangling set of keys. "It's been empty a while," Diane said, unlocking the door. "The last tenant was a patisserie. Lovely old woman, but she retired. No family to take it on. Needs a lot of work." Eleanor stepped inside. The air was still and carried the ghost of sugar, butter, and vanilla. It was a good ghost. She could see it all. The small tables along the wall, a display case gleaming with pastries, the open kitchen in the back where she could work. She could almost hear the gentle clatter of cups and the murmur of conversation. It felt more like a home in that moment than her sterile house ever had. "I'll take it," Eleanor said. The words leaving her lips before her rational mind could list the 1,000 reasons why it was a terrible idea. Diane blinked in surprise. "Don't you want to see the kitchen?" "The plumbing's probably—" "I'll take it," Eleanor repeated, a smile touching her lips for the first time in months. The work was brutal. She spent her days covered in dust and paint, scraping away decades of neglect. Leo, after initial skepticism, threw himself into the project with the fervor of a young artist claiming a new canvas. He designed a logo, an elegant, stylized lemon, and painted a beautiful mural of a lemon tree on the back wall. They worked side by side, their silence comfortable, filled with the sounds of sanding and the shared purpose of building something together. One evening, exhausted and paint-splattered, they sat on the floor of the empty shop sharing a pizza. The sun was setting, casting long golden beams through the now sparkling clean front window. "What will we call it?" Leo asked, gesturing with a slice of pizza. Eleanor looked around. The name came to her as naturally as breathing. "The Gilded Lemon." Leo considered it, then nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's perfect." The last of her settlement money and a cautious small business loan went into refurbishing the kitchen. She bought second-hand equipment, polishing it until it shone. She didn't want Julian's state-of-the-art cold stainless steel. She wanted tools with history, with soul. The night before the soft opening, Eleanor stood alone in the center of her creation. The air was rich with the scent of yeast and baking bread, a smell that felt like a homecoming. She ran her fingers over the cool marble of the counter she'd salvaged and restored herself. This was more than a business. It was a testament to resilience. It was her promise made tangible. She had taken the bitter fruit life had handed her and was determined to make something sweet from its rind. She did not know if the city was ready for her, but she was finally, unquestionably, ready for herself. 3 years had a way of softening sharp edges and building new foundations. The Gilded Lemon was no longer just a dream. It was a warm, humming reality. The scent of browned butter, citrus zest, and baking dough had permanently infused the very walls, creating an atmosphere that regulars described as like being hugged from the inside. Leo, now 15, moved through the space with an easy confidence, balancing trays of espresso cups and deftly recommending the blood orange olive oil cake to curious newcomers. He had his mother's calm demeanor, but his sketches of the cafe and its patrons, which now adorned the walls, revealed a perceptive eye that saw the poetry in the everyday. "The review is in," Leo said, not looking up from his phone as he refilled the sugar jars. His voice was carefully neutral, but Eleanor saw the slight quirk of his smile. "Let me guess," Eleanor said, her hands deep in a bowl of silky brioche dough. "Another blogger complaining our croissants are too buttery?" "The Chronicle," he corrected, finally looking up, his dark eyes sparkling. "They're calling you the city's quiet revolutionary. They say your food doesn't shout. It whispers, and somehow everyone leans in to listen." He grinned fully now. "Dad's going to hate that." Julian Croft's empire had indeed expanded to 6 restaurants, each one a monument to sleek, expensive minimalism. His public image, carefully curated by Chloe, was everywhere. Eleanor's success, by contrast, had been a slow, organic burn, fueled not by marketing but by word of mouth and the undeniable soul of her cooking. "Your father is busy with his own path," Eleanor said gently, though she appreciated Leo's fierce loyalty. "Chloe posted about the new menu at Croft Flagship," Leo said, his tone laced with a teenager's disdain for artifice. $27 for a deconstructed pea soup. It's just pea foam and a single crouton in a giant bowl." Eleanor smiled, saying nothing. Her own menu today featured a hearty potato and leek soup served in a deep, comforting bowl with a thick slice of seeded bread. Every table had ordered it. The bell above the door chimed, and a familiar figure entered. Mr. Alastair Finch, the owner of the art gallery down the street, had been one of her first and most devoted customers. Today he wasn't alone. He held the door open for an elderly woman with a formidable posture and a keen eye. "Eleanor," Alastair said, his voice a warm, cultured baritone. "This is Mrs. Edith Fortescue." She insisted on being introduced to the genius behind the almond croissant. Mrs. Fortescue fixed Eleanor with a sharp look. "Alastair claims your pastries are better than any he had in Paris." "I've come to verify this outrageous claim," Eleanor laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope I don't disappoint." She prepared a small plate with a croissant, a slice of the blood orange cake, and a tiny, glazed lemon tart. As Mrs. Fortescue sampled each, her critical expression softened into one of pure, unadulterated pleasure. Later, as the lunch rush subsided, Alastair lingered at his usual corner table. "She's a notorious critic," he confided, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And you, my dear, have just received the highest praise imaginable." She didn't say a word. She just closed her eyes and smiled. Eleanor felt a flush of pride. "It's just honest food." "Precisely," Alastair said. "That's what makes it extraordinary." He hesitated, then gestured to the chair opposite him. "May I?" She sat, the fatigue of the morning's work suddenly feeling like a pleasant warmth. "I have a proposal," he began, his hands folded on the table. They were elegant hands with long fingers that were often smudged with clay or charcoal. "My gallery is hosting a private viewing next month for a new sculptor. I was wondering if you might be interested in crafting the catering menu, something small, exquisite. Food that is itself a work of art?" Eleanor's heart leapt. It was the kind of opportunity she'd never dared to imagine. "I would be honored, Alastair." Their collaboration became a regular occurrence. They would meet in the quiet hours after the cafe closed, discussing menus as the evening light faded. Their conversations began with food and art, but soon meandered into literature, travel, memories. He spoke of losing his husband of 20 years to illness. She spoke haltingly at first of Julian. It was a meeting of minds, a slow and gentle uncovering of souls. One evening, as they sampled a new recipe for lavender shortbread, their fingers brushed over the plate. A current, sweet and sharp as lemon curd, passed between them. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. The air grew thick with a silence that was more eloquent than words. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a stray speck of flour from her cheek. The intimacy of the gesture was not one of passion, but of profound tenderness, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that had taken root in the fertile ground of their shared loneliness. It was the first brick in a new, different kind of home, and it felt terrifyingly and wonderfully like a beginning. The envelope was thick, the paper stock heavy and expensive under Eleanor's flour-dusted fingers. It stood out starkly against the morning's pile of invoices and produce delivery slips. The return address, embossed in discreet gold foil, made her breath catch. The Epicurean Society. What's that? Leo asked, peering over her shoulder as he tied his apron. I'm not sure, Eleanor murmured, using a bread knife to slice it open with a sense of momentous ceremony. She pulled out a thick card. The invitation was for the Society's annual gala, the most exclusive culinary event of the year. It was a gathering of the city's food elite, a glittering spectacle of critics, investors, and celebrity chefs where reputations were made and broken over canapes. Her eyes scanned the formal script. They were inviting her, Eleanor Vance of the Gilded Lemon, to be a featured artisan presenter. Her station would be nestled among the city's most esteemed culinary names. And then she saw it. Directly opposite her assigned space, in the prime position as the event's headline act, would be Julian Croft. A nervous flutter started in her stomach. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a summons to a very public stage, a direct juxtaposition of her world against his. Well, Leo prompted, his excitement palpable. She handed him the card. His eyes widened as he read it. The gala? Mom, this is huge. You have to do it. It's a very different environment, Leo. All those people, the pressure, it's just a bigger room, he said with the unshakable confidence of youth. The food is still the food. Your food. Alistair arrived moments later, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He read the invitation, a slow smile spreading across his face. It appears the establishment has finally discovered what the rest of us have known for years. His smile faded slightly as he noted the placement. Ah, I see. The lions are being put in adjacent cages for spectacle. Precisely, Eleanor said, her earlier excitement curdling into anxiety. You are no one's spectacle. Eleanor, Alistair said, his voice firm but gentle. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, the warmth seeping through her cotton shirt. This is an acknowledgement. They are not pitting you against him. They are placing you beside him. There is a world of difference. Across the city, in the stark minimalist office of Croft Culinary Enterprises, a nearly identical envelope was being unceremoniously ripped open by Chloe. Of course you're headlining. Darling, she said, scanning the contents before handing it to Julian. It's expected. Her expression then soured. Though it seems they've also invited that quaint little bakery you used to mention. The Gilded something, placing her right across from us. How peculiar. Julian took the invitation, his jaw tightening. He hadn't just mentioned the Gilded Lemon. He'd been silently tracking its rise through industry whispers and Leo's proud updates. He'd driven past it once, seen the line snaking down the block, and felt a confusing mix of pride and a strange, hollow envy. It's a charity event, Chloe. They invite all sorts, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. All sorts? She repeated, her tone sharp. She's not in our league, Julian. Her presence there will be confusing for the brand. It lends her an credibility she hasn't earned. She began pacing, her heels clicking on the polished concrete. We'll need to make a statement. Something breathtakingly modern. I'm thinking a fully transparent sphere with an edible landscape inside. Something that photographs incredibly. Julian looked down at the invitation again, at Eleanor's name printed in the same elegant font as his. He thought of her food, the kind that spoke of patience and care, not architectural gimmicks. He thought of the last meal they'd shared as a family, a simple roast chicken she'd made that had tasted inexplicably of forgiveness and home, a feeling he couldn't name, something between dread and longing twisted in his gut. Back at the Gilded Lemon, Eleanor made her decision. She looked from Leo's eager face to Alistair's steady, believing eyes. All right, she said, her voice finding its strength. I'll do it. She picked up a pen, not to decline, but to start sketching ideas on a napkin. But I won't try to compete with his spectacle. If they want Eleanor Vance, that's what they'll get. Her idea was simple, almost audaciously so. A single perfect dessert. A reconstruction of a lemon tart, but one that told a story. A story of sharpness and sweetness, of fragility and resilience. The gauntlet had been thrown, not by her, but by fate. And for the first time, Eleanor felt not fear, but a quiet, determined fire. She would walk into his world not as his former wife, but as a chef in her own right. She would let her food speak for itself. The Epicurean gala was a cathedral of noise and light, a swirling vortex of black ties, glittering dresses, and the clinking of champagne flutes. The air hummed with conversation and the competing aromas of 100 dishes. Eleanor stood behind her modest, beautifully appointed station, a calm island in the storm. A simple wooden sign, hand-painted by Leo, read, "The Gilded Lemon." On the pristine counter sat rows of individual serving plates, each holding her creation across the wide aisle. Julian's domain was a marvel of theatrical engineering. A sleek black monolith of a kitchen hummed with silent efficiency. His team, dressed in identical sharp uniforms, moved with robotic precision around a central, glowing platform where Julian himself was plating his masterpiece, a deconstructed forest floor involving mushroom foam, edible soil, and a delicate sugar sphere meant to represent morning dew. It was technically astounding and emotionally cold. A few feet away, Chloe preened for photographers, her smile a brilliant, brittle thing. The crowd around Julian's station was dense, a spectacle of curiosity, but Eleanor noticed the looks on their faces as they tasted his dish. Polite nods, murmured compliments on the technique, but a distinct absence of joy. They moved on quickly, their eyes already searching for the next attraction. Then, the first wave of guests found her. They were hesitant at first, drawn by the simple elegance of her presentation. She offered them a small plate with a smile. What they received was not just a dessert. It was a narrative. The base was a crumb of toasted almond sablé, gritty and robust like the foundation of a life. Upon it sat a disk of sharp, intensely flavorful lemon curd. The shock, the bitterness of loss. This was encased in a shard of clear, brittle caramel, representing the hard, protective shell one builds. But the revelation came when the guest tapped the caramel with their spoon. It shattered, releasing the scent of vanilla and thyme from a delicate cream hidden beneath. The unexpected sweetness and resilience that follows breakage. Atop it all was a single perfect candied lemon zest, twisted into a hopeful upward spiral. The reactions were not polite nods. They were silent, wide-eyed moments of comprehension. Then came the soft sighs, the closed eyes, the genuine, surprised smiles. A quiet queue began to form at her station. Not a frantic crowd, but a steady, respectful stream of people who had been told to come and taste this thing that was more than food. Julian, from his podium, watched the migration. He saw the authentic emotion on the faces leaving Eleanor's station, a stark contrast to the perfunctory appreciation he received. A hollow feeling expanded in his chest. He finished his presentation to generous applause, but it felt like empty air. Excusing himself, he moved through the crowd, drawn irresistibly toward her. He arrived just as a well-known, notoriously hard-to-please critic was taking her first bite. The woman's sharp features softened, her critical eyes misting over slightly. She looked at Eleanor not as a chef, but as a kindred spirit. "My dear," she said, her voice unusually quiet, "this is memory. This is a story." Julian reached the front of the line. For a long moment, he and Eleanor simply looked at each other across the counter, the noise of the gala fading into a distant hum. He saw not the quiet wife he had left, but a woman of immense strength and clarity, standing proudly in the light of her own creation. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough. Wordlessly, Eleanor handed him a plate. He took the spoon, his movements slow, almost reverent. He went through the ritual, the tap, the crack, the scent of thyme and vanilla released like a secret. He tasted it. First, the sharp lemon, then the rich cream, the gritty sablé, the sweet caramel, all the separate elements that shouldn't work together but somehow created a perfect, heartbreaking harmony. It was the taste of their early mornings in a tiny kitchen, of dreams whispered over burnt offerings. It was the taste of the comfort he'd taken for granted, of the quiet strength he'd dismissed as simplicity. It was the taste of everything he had sacrificed at the altar of his own ambition. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. The applause of thousands had never reached him, but this silence, this single perfect bite, shattered him completely. He saw not just a dessert, but an elegy for the life they'd had, and a celebration of the life she'd built without him. "Eleanor," he whispered, the name a confession. "It's It's perfect. She offered him a small, gracious smile, one devoid of triumph or malice. It was simply the truth. Thank you, Julian. He nodded, unable to form another word, and turned away, melting back into the crowd a changed man. He walked past Chloe, who was still chattering to investors, her voice suddenly sounding shrill and meaningless to his ears. The reviews the next day would call Julian's dish, technically, masterful and innovative. But they would call Eleanor's a revelation, profound, and the single most memorable bite of the evening, but the true victory wasn't in the papers. It was in the quiet certainty that settled in Eleanor's heart as she packed her station, Leo buzzing with excitement beside her. It was in the way Alistair found her hand and squeezed it, his pride a tangible warmth. She had not competed. She had simply presented who she was, and in a room full of noise, her quiet truth had been the only thing worth hearing. She had not stolen anyone's breath away. She had simply given them a reason to remember how to breathe.